All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Morgan Lindsay, and I serve as the coordinator for the Office of Student Accountability. Thank you to Dr. Zanskas for allowing me to come and present to you all. Hopefully, those who will be getting the recording will think this information is just as beneficial. But a few things that I just want to share with you all today. Introduce you to our team, kind of who to look for if there's ever any email correspondence that you will need to have with our office, what our office is primarily responsible for, so what different things that we handle and what ways that we can be of a benefit to you. We'll go over the Student Code of Rights and Responsibilities, some of the key things that you will need to look out for that may be applicable in some of your classes and things that you might want to refer students to our office for. I'll go over the academic misconduct process in depth with you so you kind of know what that looks like, what we're expecting of you all, and then what we will need if that student ultimately has to be referred to us. We'll go over some few things about artificial intelligence in our office right now. We saw a huge increase probably in the last 8-ish months of students using AI, a lot of faculty referrals. And so what we're looking at and kind of what our standard is when it comes to you all in your courses. And then we'll go over any questions. I'll give you all some contact information and we'll be out of here. I'm hoping not to take up too much of your time. I know we've got classes later. So hang in with me. Hopefully I won't be before you too long. So like I said, I want to introduce you first to our team. Amber Bush is the Associate Dean of Students. She's been with the University of Memphis for about 13 years now, and with the Office of Student Accountability for, I believe, the last 8. She essentially oversees both myself and Miss Griffin, works very closely with the Dean of Students on any interim actions that need to go out, and she reviews all reports that come to our Maxient software, which is our case management software on campus. So she has a lot of responsibility making sure that each report goes out to the appropriate offices, and then what needs to be handled by our office gets to us. Then you have Miss Griffin. She is the assistant director and a conduct educator. She has been in investigations for the state of Tennessee for about the last 30 years, but with the University of Memphis for the past 5. Now, the conduct educator designation is important because if you ever refer a student to our office, we would be the ones contacting primarily with you and that student. So Ms. Bush would review the final decision on that case, but it would be myself or Ms. Griffin who is responsible for ultimately coming to a resolution. And then there's myself. I started with the university about a year ago. That was after I graduated in spring of 2024. And then I'm back getting my master's in leadership and policy studies program with a concentration in student affairs. So glad to be here working for the university who did so much for me. And so that is us, who you would be, again, in contact with primarily if you ever have to refer a student to our office. So, just a little bit about what all we oversee. We're responsible for all academic general misconduct, outreach, and disciplinary review on campus. So, of course, academic misconduct, which you all are most familiar with, any cheating, plagiarism, unauthorized use of artificial intelligence, disrupting classroom environments. I placed that on there because if you have any in-person courses, if there were to be certain rules that you set for your class that a student is not following, any failure to comply with those rules that makes it difficult for other students to be able to engage, then that is something that you could also refer your student to our office for, in addition to, again, any cheating, plagiarism, and use of AI. Primarily, we see a lot more of general misconduct. So again, a lot of fighting, vandalism, any threats, trespassing on campus. We deal mostly with students who are coming out of our residence halls. However, occasionally that will transfer to our graduate students as well, if they're living on campus or a part of any on-campus organizations during their time here. As far as the outreach and disciplinary review, the outreach is primarily my portion. Again, one of the reasons why I'm here for you today. I do a lot of presentations for our Greek life about hazing, generally just knowing what the student code is about and what can get their organizations, in a bit of a tiffy. But I also present to ACAD classes, and then Ms. Bush is responsible primarily for any disciplinary review. So, for example, you have a student who graduates from the University of Memphis. They want to go to law school, medical school, want to enter into the law enforcement realm. Then what can happen is those institutions and organizations can send our office notification that they need a disciplinary review for a student. We'll check our files to see what applies as long as the student is given their consent, and then send that off to them. So that's a quick overview of what all we're responsible for. Again, we could spend a lot more time going in depth, but again, primarily we're here today to talk about academic misconduct and what we can do to help you. So, before we get into the process specifically, I want to kind of talk about the Student Code of Rights and Responsibilities. Now, we do have an online version that is much easier to access than this little book here, but there are a few different things that it covers and goes over. It's generally what I would like to call our office's syllabus, okay, for students. It tells you what behavioral expectations and responsibilities are, what those policies look like, the ins and outs, any rights and privileges associated with the student during the student conduct process, what the student disciplinary process looks like. So it walks them through step by step what to expect before they meet with us. That's if they choose to read it, of course. Any outcomes that might be assigned to the student, the appeal process, and then any interim actions or holds that can be administered by our office. I'm going to break down each of those a little bit more. And again, if there are any questions or concerns as you go along, kind of note them down and we will cover them all at the end. So, as far as behavioral expectations are concerned, and you all specifically, one of the policies that we look at most is academic misconduct. Now, again, that can include any cheating, plagiarism, the use of a substitute, whether that be a physical person or any sort of software, particularly unauthorized assistance, which again is where we see a lot of our AI use recently. Three, disruptive classroom behavior. I went over that one a little bit earlier. Failure to comply. So that could also apply to some of the academic misconduct as well, especially if you have a student who has multiple violations in your course. So which is one of the reasons why we encourage you all to report, just so we have a history of what that pattern looks like for that student, which also helps us to be aware and communicate that to their other professors if they have questions in the future. And then lastly, violation of privacy. This one may not apply as much to you all. However, again, if you have in-person classes or there's material that you give to your students that's not intended to be uploaded to other websites and things like that that students might frequent for homework assistance or things like that, then that could fall under that violation of privacy. And that's something that our office could take a look into. Now, the rights and privileges, some of the things that students are allowed in the conduct process is one, to know what the allegation is and any information that's supporting it. So for you all, that might look like access to allowing them to review the initial report that you send our office, any Turnitin reports, any subsequent AI reports that are generated, or the syllabus, things like that. So that we can reemphasize what you all provided them and why goes against your class's policy. A right to an advisor. This one students do and don't take advantage of. It's kind of a case by case situation. They do have the right to have an individual present with them during their meetings with our office. Now, if that is about your course, then it wouldn't necessarily be you. It could be another professor, their academic advisor, a parent, guardian, anyone like that. They are allowed to have an attorney or legal counsel present. However, university legal counsel would be present during those meetings as well. And then they also have access to their educational records within OSA. So anything that is sent during their time about a particular case regarding your course or any other student conduct case that they have the right to all that information as well. I would also like to note that if you ever had a student who is making threats or there's any worry for your safety or the safety of your class, please be sure to let us know so that way we can work to redact that information as much as we can from those reports. Obviously, if it happened in that particular class, the student might know and still choose to retaliate. However, we have a policy against that as well, to protect you and protect the students. The student disciplinary process one is blank because we're going to go over that in just a moment. As far as outcomes are concerned, there are a few different ones listed in our student code, but also some that are just normal that we go through. Obviously, if a student comes to our office, a first time offense likely be a warning, depending on the severity. Then we escalate to probation. We try to not go to suspension and expulsion as much as possible. We ultimately want the students here. And so as far as probation is concerned, we typically will start with a year and extend it up to 3. After that, about 3-year mark, it'll be indefinite for the end of that student's educational journey with us, unless the violation warrants a suspension or expulsion. Ultimately, with suspension, they do have the right to come back, but with expulsion, they are permanently removed from the university. And then as far as our educational outcomes are concerned, the RAISE module will be what is most applicable to you all. So that is our academic integrity module, and it is given to students on their first violation. What will happen is you would send your report to our office and your academic misconduct reporting form, if that is what the student agrees with. We would take that form, upload it, and create a case in Maxient, and then we would provide them the instructions to complete that module. So that's not something that you all have to worry about. Some other, I won't say popular, but common sanctions that we will give out to students. Ethics in action is a decision-making module. So typically for, again, other first-time offenses that may not be related to academic misconduct, this is one that we often provide students. Reflection papers, conflict-wise, which is mostly for our physical violence, and then alcohol and other drugs. We do see a lot of alcohol and marijuana related violations take place on campus. So that's just something else that our students are often given. Now, regarding the appeal process, for it to be considered valid, it must meet the appeal grounds, which are material procedural error on the basis of new information, and then, of course, if there's any bias of a student conduct board member. Now, with the appeal, they can choose to go the internal appeal reader route, which are designated individuals on campus who have been trained to go through the appeals. We would send that information to them, and they would return that to us with the decision. Or the least popular, the Tennessee Uniform Administrative Procedures Act. We don't see students too often choose this option. It is a lot more pressing, but those are the two options that students have. And then for any interim actions or holds. So again, if you or a colleague find yourself in a situation where your immediate safety or that of your students is placed in jeopardy, what we will do is provide an interim action. So what that would do is remove that student from the university community temporarily until a decision or resolution is made in their case. As far as holds are concerned, if you ever have a student come to you and they say, hey, I'm not able to register for classes because I have a judicial hold, then that's because our office has placed the hold because they didn't complete their sanction on time. We also have the right to place a sanction if a student is refusing to meet with us. We typically try not to do that. We try to give them some grace, though, before we go to that extreme. So the big ticket item here with you all is going to be the academic misconduct process. And so I've gone through it step by step, and I'll kind of break down each one as we go. And then I've provided on some other slides a little bit more information, some questions to consider. So one, the academic misconduct process looks a little bit different than the regular student disciplinary process, primarily because we ask that you all get involved. Now, for general student misconduct, we would receive the report or the allegation and immediately open the case, start meeting with witnesses or whoever the involved parties are. However, because we know that your students spend time with you, they are corresponding with you throughout the year, and it's likely that you have a more established relationship with them, we ask that after an allegation is made or you come across an assignment that you believe might have been plagiarized or that they've cheated on, then we ask that you meet with them to kind of use and take advantage of the relationship that you have with them to allow them the space to kind of walk through if they did violate the policy, and if so, what that process looked like. We found that they're more likely to be more forthcoming with you all than they are with us, especially because, we're up on the third floor of the UC, a little bit out of the way. And so it's a little bit scary when you think about the Office of Student Accountability. At least that's what we've heard from students. So we like you all to meet with them first. And then if you come to a resolution, and I will go over the academic misconduct reporting form in just a moment, but you would submit the academic misconduct reporting form if you and the student come to a resolution together. So you would fill out the form, allow the student however many days that you are comfortable with to complete it. At that time, if they don't complete it, one of two things can be done. You can reach back out to the student to see if they would like to sign the form, or you could refer them to our office. And when you refer them to our office, it kind of starts the rest of our process as it normally would proceed. And I will provide you all a list of some of the things to expect or that we would need from you if you make that referral. So Step 4 in the process would be an educational conference. Now, that is completely with our office. For you all, it would look like an investigative meeting, and that's only if we need to speak with you all. In the past, I think a lot of conduct educators have made the choice to reach out to faculty members. However, depending on how well written out your narrative is, we may not need to call you in, and we try not to because we know you all have courses, have responsibilities that you have to attend to. And so once we meet with the student, what we will do is either propose an informal resolution agreement or we will provide them a no action determination. So the informal resolution agreement will be similar to you all's academic misconduct reporting form. However, we have a different outline for that document. We would again provide that student outcomes and sanctions that they will be required to complete. Again, if they were to not complete those sanctions or outcomes, we will place a hold on their account. A no action determination would occur when we look at all the information and we determine that a violation did not occur. At that point, typically we close out the case. However, if it involves an academic misconduct violation of any kind, then what would typically happen is students will likely file a grade appeal. We try to resolve it in our office because we know that process can be a bit egregious for you all. So we do our best to deal with it in-house once it makes it to us. However, that's sometimes not always possible. And I will kind of touch on some of the things to look out for a little bit later as to why we might not find the student responsible for a violation. And then lastly, the student conduct board hearing. If a student does not agree with the informal resolution agreement proposed, then they do have the right to elect to go before the student conduct board. Now, the student conduct board typically is chaired by a faculty member or a member within our office that's not directly associated with the case. And what would happen? They would meet before a jury of their peers. You would have an opportunity to share your evidence. The student would have an opportunity to provide theirs, and then the student conduct board would make a decision. At that point, the conduct educators are hands off until the outcome is proposed. So with you all's process, again, it's a little bit different than our normal student conduct process just because we want you all to take into consideration that you know your course better than anyone and what's expected. You know how your students are writing, what their work looks like based on the pattern of over time. And so we want to take that into advantage when we think about what we're looking for. So a few things to consider. One was the assignment flagged on Turnitin. No, not everything is a writing assignment. In that case, you would look at the processes that the student used to solve any sort of equation or things like that. A lot of times we do see writing assignments though, hence why the Turnitin question is posed. Is the writing within the student's normal scope of ability? A lot of faculty that I've worked with in the past year have said, hey, this is not what I'm used to seeing from the student. It's elevated, or they're using certain language that they had not used throughout the entire year, or that I know they have not used in my communications with them. And then are there any sources or theories not applicable or relevant to the course used for the assignment's foundation? This is another red flag that a lot of faculty have presented to us in the past. They'll be going through students' assignments and there may be theories that are outdated or that they have excluded from the course for any particular reason. And those may be used in the student's paper that kind of ding them off to say, hey, there may be something going on here. So once you have determined whether or not you believe the student has committed an academic integrity violation and you have the opportunity to meet with them, a few questions that you can ask yourself or that you can use to guide you through those meetings are: one, how did the student write the paper? Or what was their process to solving the equations, coming up with the foundation for their assignment? A lot of times we found that students who are found responsible for academic integrity violations are very hesitant to respond to that question, even when they meet with us. They're not able to recall what they did, or they use a lot of very vague and broad language as far as what the topic of that assignment might be. Hence the second question: are they able to recall enough information about the topic or the assignment without being prompted? And are they able to do so without the assignment in hand? So for example, that could look like a in-person meeting or even an online meeting where you're asking the student, hey, do you recall what the basis of the paper was without them being able to see it or have access to it. Again, this is another area where a lot of times we found that students are unable to recall that information, or even if it was presented in class. And then, has the student experienced any traumatic event recently? One of the reasons why we consider asking this question is because when we go over the outcomes provided in the academic misconduct reporting form, a lot of times faculty members are quick to want to fail a student for the entire course over one assignment. And so while it seems, I understand it seems very fair to you all, sometimes we have to ask those deeper questions. I know we did have some students last year who may have suffered a loss. And they're like, hey, I didn't have enough time. I threw it in there because I still wanted to submit something. And while we are there to encourage them that that's not right, what we can also do is provide certain supportive resources for them as well. Recommending students to the counseling center, getting them in with tutoring services or services that you all are already recommending to them, but that they may have, in the sake of that moment, out of impulse, not taken the time to utilize. So, no, it's a lot jumbled up here. But this is the academic misconduct reporting form. All of this information is online and access to the form, and I have the link at the end of this presentation, which I will provide to you, Dr. Zanskis, to send out. And so what you see in the beginning is the resolution options. And so again, that's that resolution by agreement, which would be this form right here, or the resolution by investigation and hearing, which would be the referral to our office. Um, there are a few different clauses and statements that you all would have the opportunity to go over. One, depending on whether or not they're a graduate student or an undergraduate. And then, of course, while the case is pending, should it be the end of the semester, the advice is to assign them an I until the case is resolved. Typically, we will try to get that decision to you as soon as possible. And faculty in the past have done a really great job at staying in communication with me until that process is over. So that's what we advise in the meantime. So again, if you choose to provide a referral, there's some information down here of materials to include. I provided them on a much bigger slide in just a moment. And then the reporting form itself. So of course you would enter the student's information, yours, the course, what particular assignment is, the day of the violation, and the student's U number. That helps us to go in and create the case, assign the correct code or policy violation. And then we have the violation type. So again, unauthorized materials or assistance, acting or utilizing a substitute, multiple submissions, plagiarism, etc. Then you would go to the resolution type. So if you reach out to a student and they do not respond to your request to me, you can mark that box if they do not get back to you, therefore removing you from the process, right? Ultimately, we want them to want to talk to you all first, but we understand that some students are not going to respond, especially if it's the summertime, or if they know that they might have got themselves caught. They may not want to respond to you all. So you'll be able to mark that box. If you've attempted to resolve it informally and you were not able to reach an agreement, there's an option for that as well. And then you have the actual resolution. So 0 on an academic exercise, an F in the course, the option to revise and resubmit, a reduced academic exercise grade or reduced course grade. Those are going to be my suggestions and recommendations for students, especially if it's a first-time offense. Revise and resubmit has become popular. However, some students are reluctant to do so, especially if they are adamant that they did not do what they're accused of. But those are the options that we provide for students. With the F in the course, typically we only see that if there are multiple instances, so 3 or 4 assignments where a student has continually used AI, plagiarized, or whatnot. So once you determine how you would like the case resolved, you would select whether it was a first violation, second, or if the student is currently on disciplinary probation. For that section, you would want to reach out to our office to determine what that student's academic history is. All of our case files are separated based on whether there's student conduct, FYI, or academic integrity violations. And so we would be able to go in the system with the student's U number and their name, see how many violations they have already, and then provide that information to you so you can make the correct choice here. And then you would sign it and provide it to the student. If the student chooses not to sign it after certain amount of time, that's when you would want to refer it to us, and then we would see out the case from there. We would then ask for all of the information that's here at the bottom for you to include when you send us that email. So, what we would need from you, like I said, this is just if you were to file refer that report to our office. Of course, the course syllabus, a lot of faculty now have statements about the use of artificial intelligence, and a lot of times that is used as our leading rationale, depending on whether or not the case gets to our office, and then especially if it goes to the student conduct board. The narrative of the incident, a copy of the assignment and any instructions, the Turnitin report if it's applicable, and then any subsequent AI reports that you generate. So, regarding the use of artificial intelligence and OSA, like I said, in the last 8 or so months, we've seen a huge uptick in the use of AI, specifically on our sanction submissions. What we did is our office established a 20% precedent, meaning any use of AI over that 20%, the student has to revise and resubmit their sanction. If they don't within a particular amount of time, or if they resubmit it and it's still over that 20%, we do reserve the right to add additional violations and sanctions to that particular case. It's not necessarily to try to continue to punish the student, but if the goal is ultimately to reflect and learn from the behavior that caused them the violation in the first place, we want them to actually take advantage of that opportunity and complete the assignment appropriately. Um, that being said, the guiding standard for academic integrity outcomes, if a faculty member's syllabi indicates that the use of artificial intelligence is prohibited, then again, that becomes the leading rationale for the outcomes in our case. So ultimately, it's up to your discretion. We do have some faculty members who are weaving in the use of AI into their courses. And so if that student uses it, they are allowed to cite it and indicate that to the professor or receive permission ahead of time. However, if that's not the case and it is explicitly stated in the syllabus, then that is often the rationale that we use for students who are referred to our office. And of course, like I said at the end, any questions or whatnot that you all have, I'm more than willing to answer. So, any questions, concerns about any of the information that was presented, anything that came to mind, hypothetical scenario that you might have been presented with that you're curious about? Hmm. Yeah. Hmm.
How many people come in having a nebulous like idea of what the instructor or the university allows, like, or
So thus far, we've only had one student really give us the runaround, particularly because there's a clause on the university library's website about Grammarly. However, the issue was the professor did not allow the use of AI. The student's both papers were flagged for Turnitin or on Turnitin, significant amount, 23 and 30%. But the student's argument was, well, the university states that I can use it via the website. And so what we had to do is ultimately again go back to the professor's indication for that course. But then also with the progression of platforms like Grammarly, who did not previously have AI, that has been something that we've been trying to work through. Um, Ultimately, most students don't come in with any knowledge of what the university's policy is on it, or they didn't even read the syllabus through like they said they would. And so they're like, well, I didn't know. But if it's in the syllabus, we hold students to that. Mhm.
Instead of it being part of education.
Yeah.
And so they try to get, they find out they do it in another class and,
Yes, right. So that's kind of the purpose of the educational sanctions, specifically raised. Again, that's our one specifically for first time academic integrity violations. We haven't too much seen a repetitive we don't see those students often come back to our office for academic integrity violations. And yes, that is the unfortunate thing about our office's reputation on campus. It's like, okay, if you send a student to student accountability, they're in trouble. This is the end. They're getting put out of school. Myself, I can only speak for myself. But as a student who went here, who had to go through the student conduct process, maybe not as a respondent, but as a complainant in a case, I have learned and I've taken the position that ultimately I want students to be here. And so my job is to work with students to say, hey, what all is going on and what can we do to ultimately be a resource to you moving forward? And that's how I kind of phrase it to students. Because what happens is if students are not essentially checked for it in the beginning, then we do see that pattern and then it becomes abuse and they're not using it for the sake of learning something or it being beneficial to everyone. And so that's kind of how we look at it, or me personally. We Most students are not put out of school for an academic integrity violation, and so we do our best to educate them through those sanctions, and ultimately, yes, be there to answer any questions, but also ask them. Go back to your faculty and staff, and if you're having trouble in courses, use them as a resource. So a lot of times with new students that I meet, especially freshman year, whether it be for academic integrity or student misconduct violation, I encourage them to work with their faculty, get to know them, and form those relationships. So that way, when they are suffering or struggling in a class, they can make the choice to not necessarily use the easy way out and ask for help.
Have somebody that I can
Mhm.
I talk with them about it. They agree to revise and resubmit
Mhm.
because they were aware of it. It's
Mhm.
their first time. You still want us to do one that says we resolve this and the person's decided to revise this resubmit, or do you just want us to keep quiet about it and just deal with it internally?
So ideally, we would still want you to report it because the violation the still took place. And so what we would do, we would still create the case. We would still provide them that raised module when they, as long they were revising and resubmitting to you, but we would still provide them the raised module just as an extra layer of saying, hey, these are some of the positives, pros and cons to using artificial intelligence, plagiarizing, whatever the case may be. And then hopefully the subsequent violation won't happen. We do see that a lot of times faculty will choose not to report it. Again, you may run into the issue though later down the line where we have seen two or three professors say, hey, I have this student and they're plagiarizing, and it's been in multiple classes at that point.
How do you-
How do I intersect with?
what's it?
So what will happen is if you all report a student a bit, typically they will go through the list, and depending on what the report reads, they will coordinate with our office to see what actions we are taking for that student. They meet every 2 weeks, I believe, on Monday at 3. And so we go through those students to coordinate what resources are being provided to them, ultimately to get them connected to who might be the best support for them. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so what they will do is, again, depending on how the report reads, they will initiate contact with the student, but ultimately the student will still go through the student conduct process. Just so we can address it. Again, it may result in a no action determination, but it's still us doing our due diligence to assess the threat and the credibility of it, to make sure that we're, again, focusing on keeping you all and the other students safe. Okay.
It is
Hmm.
accurate.
Yeah.
And you can, I don't know, at least for me, where you can rationalize it one way or the other.
Yeah.
That's back to, it's this word reporting.
Yeah.
What do you do in that situation? And then like 6 months down the road, like, oh,
Right.
gosh, that's, oh, wait.
Yeah, yeah. So I did my internship for my grad program with Residence Life this year. And so one of the things that they worked on as RAs being in the residence hall is like, okay, this isn't necessarily something that's reportable now, but then it comes up later. I always tell them at the end of the day, at a minimum, it could be an FYI. And what we will do, we will stash that with the student. FYIs aren't something that we would have to report out to a medical school, law school, or any other agency. But it does help us say, hey, we have a track record of, this student's behavior is becoming increasingly aggressive. It hasn't quite hit that point, but this is something that we need to be aware of. Ultimately, I always tell students and other staff, it's better to report it now than us have to do something much worse later. Also, it does help us as we look at what sanctions or outcomes to give that student, because if the behavior is progressively getting worse, then we might need to look at a suspension versus probation, or we need to look at an extended probation, versus us finding out about it the one time the student absolutely blows a lid, and then we have no choice but to suspend them or expel them. So with that one, you would do the submit a concern report. And I will also include a link to that to the email I sent to you, Dr. Zanskis. Any other questions? We good? Okay. Well, this is just some general contact information. I will include the link when I send you the presentation. So that way you all have access to that, and for the submit a concern report. Again, we're located in 359 in the University Center up there on the 3rd floor. If you ever need anything and need us in person, we're always by the phones, and someone will always be answering the email. Really appreciate you, Dr. Zanskis, for allowing us to come and speak with you all. Ultimately, we try our best to communicate with you all as much as we can, but we know sometimes things can get lost in translation. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to clarify anything. And ultimately, if you ever need anything from our office, please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you.